Actually, I'll introduce him now. So Scott is the principal program manager for, he works with .NET and open source and various community operations at Microsoft. While Scott's setting up, just a few thoughts on this. How many of you have been involved for open source for longer than, let's say, 7 years? A lot of people. What about longer than 10 years? Now I'm curious. 15 years? Good grief. 20? Some of you are lying. Okay. So you probably remember this, but many years ago, Microsoft was pretty uneasy about open source. And I think it's safe to say that particularly I'd say in the last 5 years or so, there's been a pretty dramatic change at Microsoft. Satya Nadella, who's running the show now, I think has had a significant impact there. And throughout this change at Microsoft, throughout all of this cultural adjustments, we've talked a lot about culture over the last couple of days. This guy has been there for a significant chunk of this and has been a significant driver of this. He's a great friend and I think one of the most talented people in our industry. And part of the reason I think Microsoft is such a wonderful contributor to open source and in many ways leading the way where other companies aren't is largely because of Scott. So give him a huge round of applause.
Aw, thank you. What a great bunch of keynotes. I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed. We've got hand-drawn slides and a captain in the Air Force and one of the most active GitHubbers, and I have a bunch of animated GIFs of Neil Patrick Harris. But it's okay. That's fine. Yeah, so my name is Scott Hanselman. You can go out and Google with Bing for Scott. And I'm in an epic battle right now with the Scott toilet paper people, so get on that and help me out with that. I've also got a podcast called Hansel Minutes. If you like NPR, you can check it out. It's one of the most diverse podcasts out there, a lot of different topics. It's non-denominational. It's not a Microsoft podcast. I've also got one called This Developer's Life that you should check out that I do with Rob Connery, and it's lots of fun. It's great. As Jono said, I work here. But I live in Portland, Oregon, so I actually work on the Forest Moon, safely outside the Redmond reality distortion field. And when I went to work at Microsoft, people said I was a sellout, and they were like, "You're a sellout," and I felt really sad about that. And I didn't know how I was going to deal with that, but somehow I found a way, because before I worked at Microsoft, I felt I looked a certain way, and after. It's worked out pretty good, And it's got a complicated org chart, but we make it work. We make it work. So what I want to talk to you about is this discussion that I had at Intel with this individual. It was an older person, and they were somewhere between 100 and 120, early single digits Intel employee who wanted to know how to become a web developer. And I said, well, wow, wait a second, you've been a developer for like 70 years, This is a picture of that person taking a selfie. Just to give you a sense of how old that we're talking about. This was a kind of a Lisp developer who could look at some Lisp and say, ooh, you're missing a parentheses. And then put the exact number of parentheses back that you needed. This was the kind of person that would go and say what's that? Oh, I'm sorry, I was inventing the compiler. This is the level of individual that we're talking about. But this person wanted to be a web developer, and they're asking me, which was very awkward. And I was like, well, okay, how would I explain this to someone who is an engineer but slept through all of the crappy parts of the internet, right? They missed all the yucky bits and all the one-pixel transparent GIFs and all the nested tables. So I said, all right, well, let's start with this. There's this great quote that there's a world market for maybe 5 computers. We've all heard this quote before. Theoretically, Thomas J. Watson said this from IBM, and the idea was that there would be 5 computers, 1 per continent, like a big refrigerator, that would be in Europe, and that would be the one machine in Europe, and then maybe, I guess, Europe would have one, and Britain would want their own because Britain, but the idea that there would be 5 of them, and then that would be it. And then we would have sold all the computers. Now, I can't prove that quote really happened, and I really don't know what the guy looks like, but I do have this really old book, so we'll just make that the guy. Okay. So this is actually happening. We have 5 computers. We have the clouds, right? We have the Azure cloud, and we've got the bookstore has a cloud. And this is a picture of the Azure cloud. And I realize that we're a little behind, but we're getting color, which is going to be great. And we're adding new capacity all the time, which is exciting. And he's really, really been awesome. So I said, well, to the individual at Intel, there's this idea of the cloud. And the guy says, well, that's what hipsters call hosting, right? And I was like, it's a little bit more than that. How do you get a virtual machine today? And just like we heard from HashiCorp, well, there was a time when it took a while. And the person at Intel says, well, I fill out a fax form and I fax it to IT, and then they make me a virtual machine in a couple of weeks. And that's the reality in a lot of big enterprises, right? But the cloud is more interesting than that. And where the fundamentals of where the cloud started were the fundamentals of virtualization. So I said to the individual at Intel, I said, well, look at this diagram. These are the characteristics of an operating system. And he says, well, yeah, I know I invented all of that, which was really awkward. But I said, okay, it's the virtualization of that. The first time you saw a virtual machine was amazing. And the idea that you can pick it up and stick it in the cloud, put it in a data center, move it from place to place, that is the beginning of the power of the cloud. I can go up somewhere to like VM Depot, which is a Microsoft site, and I can pick anything like a Jenkins, Ubuntu, a VM. I can grab a couple of command prompt things, drop out to the command prompt, and Azure has ASCII art, which is great because we're not evil anymore. And I can make a virtual machine like that, right, which is great. But the real promise of the cloud is the idea that not the virtual machines that you have to manage, because I don't like remoting into virtual machines. Like he was pointing out, virtual machines, you make them, but they're free like a puppy. You have to go and call apt-get update on the puppy and upgrade the puppy. It's you have to SSH into the puppy, and they really don't like that. It's a huge hassle to manage virtual machines. You really want to up-level things a little bit higher. You want to do like websites where you can just deploy an application and not think about the underlying system. It's kind of like a virtual machine is your first house. You learn it, you deal with it, you have to manage it, or like learning how to drive a stick shift, and then you get an automatic car. You get a house first, then you get a rental, or if you're a rock star like me, you get a hotel, and then you totally thrash the hotel because it's platform as a service. That's the idea. And I've completely thrashed my hotel, but I don't have to worry about it because I don't deal with the virtual machine underlying there. I can go and have someone handle that for me. So not having to think about that makes me really, really happy. One of the things that kind of sucks, though, as we're marching forward in time, as was pointed out in the first keynote, was that those layers of abstraction are increased such that I don't have to think about things that I used to. For example, I've got a multi-page resume because I'm old, and somewhere on page 2, all of page 2, in fact, is dedicated to scaling web farms, because that used to be the hardest thing one could do. And now I work with young people who say, oh, this web farm is taking like a minute. It sucks. And like all scaling of web farms is encapsulated in good design, thanks to people like Rachel, into a slider bar. Think about how that makes me feel. The 90s, for me, is a slider bar now. Think about how when I use a tool like Vagrant that I go to the command prompt and something says updating a server farm. And it basically said you wasted 10 years of your life learning how to do server farms. What's great about that, though, for someone who's learning about the internet today is that they don't have to sweat that. We did all that work. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we're creating really great software that can be automated in ways that we could only dream of. So now when someone on my team says, updating a server farm, and they're just like, what just happened? And I say the only thing that I can, magic. So then the gentleman at Intel says, well, what language should I use? What language should I use to talk to the cloud? And I said, a good cloud doesn't care about language choice. You can use whatever makes you happy. You can use .NET or Java or Python or PHP. Oh, no, don't use PHP. But really, I mean, really anything but PHP. No, I'm just kidding. Use anything that makes you happy. It's okay. You can use whatever makes you happy. I said, that's amazing. I can do whatever I want to on the cloud. And I said, well, do that, and remember that a good cloud is an open source cloud. It lets you have open source SDKs that talked to whatever. And there was a time when our systems were not open, and now they are. But the most important thing is to remember the layer of abstraction that you work at is so much higher than before. There was a conference that I was at once where the chief architect of Netflix at the time, his name was Adrian Cockcroft. What is that noise? It's not me. It's not me. Is that okay? Am I having a stroke? It's a ghost. Okay, I just want you to know that that's not me. Until we find out that it totally is me. Adrian Cockcroft shows up at this conference, and he's talking about how they scaled Netflix into Europe. And he's British, which is amazing, and he gets like +2 charisma just for being British. So he shows up, and he talks about how they scaled Netflix into the cloud, and he was setting up SSDs. So they were switching from spinning rust. By the way, if I can hear your hard drive, you can't work at my company. Over to SSDs. And it was a very simple decision. They were talking about the number of IOPS that were involved, and it was like 300 IOPS or input operations a second for $1, or 3,000 for $3. And he was like, that's a very cool business decision. I will pay 3 times more money. I will get 10 times more perf. Awesome. Let's go over to SSDs. Then this kid comes up afterwards. I think we were in Denmark. I can't do Danish, but I can do nerd. And he was like, actually, sir, you know that SSDs are extremely unreliable and the mean time before failure, and basically lectured the chief architect of Netflix on why the move to SSDs was a bad idea because they're unreliable, and said, what are you going to do when they all fail? Why would you do this? But he did it. And the guy from Netflix says, that's not my problem, I'm renting them. Oh my God. The kid didn't even know he was cut. I mean, he just stood there. And it was like one of those ninja movies where they do the thing like this, and then his head had been cut and his brain was falling down. The whole top part of the skull fell down on the ground, and I wasn't sure, should I push the body over, or is someone going to carry it out? I don't have a GIF of that, but it looks something like this. I mean, it was amazing. And it's that kind of thing where you're living at a different layer of abstraction. We're thinking about global dashboards. And if you're a small startup or a big company like Red Hat, you need a global dashboard with a picture of the Earth with just dots around. It makes you feel better as your startup. And then if you can scroll your dashboard and there's got charts and stuff, that's cool. This is the Azure dashboard. If you want to use another dashboard, that's cool. But don't tell me that that's a dashboard. I'm tired of meeting people at open source. I got a dashboard. It's called Top. All right, fine. I will upgrade HTOP. Dashboard. You cannot argue that that is an adequate dashboard. It's like trying to argue that Mario is the better brother. Everyone knows it's Luigi. It's always been Luigi. Luigi, always. So we talk about the cloud, the promise of elasticity, the promise of being able to orchestrate all that. Let's switch over to the client side. Let's talk about the browser. Remember that diagram? There was a time when you would sit in front of a computer that looked like this and talk to a refrigerator that looked like that, and you would hit you'd hit a page, and it would look. Oh, there we go, and it would. You would hit an application, and it would show up on that screen over on the left there. But who did the work? The work happened on the fridge. That's where the work's happening now. But when Tim Berners-Lee made the first page of the internet like that, he was thinking about an infinite book. He wasn't thinking about an application platform. And we need to really give respect to him. Another thing we need to give significant respect to is the fact that a lot of you have some pretty fancy job titles, and Tim did not put the in front of his title. And when he invented the web, he didn't think it was going to become that big of a deal. He was thinking it was going to be a great infinite book, right? He didn't think about Java and Silverlight and PDFs. He didn't intend it to be something like a PDF. He never knew that PDF would become the 5th most popular religion on the planet. No one could predict something like that. So then we're browsing the web, and then Java happened, right? And how did we know Java happened? Because we were browsing, and then Java loaded, right? And then these guys were like, we can do it too, whee! And then they're like, we've got YouTube, we're relevant, right? But what were we doing? We were trying to put tiny virtual machines inside of the browser. We were trying to do something like this. And it's like, that's not, okay, that's fine. And people will go and build systems like that. I went to Toyota recently to get my car worked on, and the guy booted up Windows XP, launched Firefox, opened a jar file, acknowledged that the NSA determined Java was a bad idea on the client, said yes, filled out a form, and then loaded the jar file that was a terminal emulator to then go VT100 to an AS400 in the back, and then look me in the eye and say, this new system is great. That's not what the internet intended. We didn't want to turn everything into just, teapot demos. You can't just write once, run everywhere. We all know it's write once, debug everywhere. And then JavaScript comes out, and don't do this. Java people hate that. They really don't like that. JavaScript comes out, and we all think it's a toy, right? We're just using it to put alert pwned as our names in forms and stuff, right? And it's not really like a language that's useful or possible to be used. Here's a flowchart that describes what it's like to work in JavaScript. What? JavaScript. But then people started doing amazing stuff. People would go and build entire terminal emulators and stuff, and Commodore 64 emulators in JavaScript. Jason Scott and the folks at archive.org have a complete archive of all the video games in the world that are now running on JavaScript. What could we do next? Francois Bellard went and built a Linux implementation entirely in JavaScript. So then when bosses and CEOs come to me and say, hey, we can run this site without JavaScript, right? No, you can't. If you disable JavaScript, you will probably die, all right? And it's always people who run with JavaScript disabled that are usually vegans and CrossFitters, and then I'm a vegan CrossFitter and I run with JavaScript disabled. No, you can't do that. If you do that, you're not going to be able to see amazing games. You're not going to be able to do things like run Quake in the browser. You won't be able to go and take C++ and compile it down into JavaScript. And you probably think that this is the part of the talk where I will then run Quake in a browser, but no. I won't do that. But what I will do is I will take the characteristics of JavaScript and I will overlay it on the characteristics of an operating system such that we can see that JavaScript has security, it has storage, it has multiple graphics subsystems, both 2D and 3D, it has animations, it has garbage collection, it has all the characteristics. JavaScript must be an operating system. Now, with Atwood's law, we can apply that any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. We also note that mobile devices have multiple operating systems. They have the one that's shipped with the device, and they have JavaScript. And that's interesting. But still, people seem to insist it's not a good idea, like this young man said that betting on HTML5 and JavaScript was too soon. It wasn't ready. And they went back to native. But then we started to see amazing implementations of Facebook that were done entirely in JavaScript. I think that HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS are happening. The open web is happening, and it is based on open source. And one of our great philosophers once said that the avalanche has already begun. It is too late for the pebbles to vote. What a great freaking quote. There's pebbles at the bottom of the mountain having a meeting about the avalanche. That's your boss. This HTML5 and JavaScript, is it baked? Do you think that it'll be able to deal with the complicated text boxes over data that we do here at AFLAC? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Do you know who said that? It was Kosh from Babylon 5. Respect. Thank you. One of our great philosophers. Always one in the audience. Now, when you think about HTML5 and JavaScript, when you say HTML5, it's really the collection of technologies. And sometimes it can be really challenging to figure out what's HTML and what's HTML5. So I've made a very simple explanation. Basically, try it out in Internet Explorer. And if it worked, it's probably not HTML5. Now, there was a time when HTML tables were the most complicated thing in computer science. This is about when you left engineering. This was the peak. I had a PhD in HTML tables. I would go into any job, and they would say, do you know tables? I would say, yes, I do. And boom, junior engineer. And then next thing you know, you're moving up in the company, and they say, do you know row span? Yes. I'm running the company at this point. And I know that the maximum number of nested tables in Netscape Navigator 4 is 32. And the only way that you know that is when you write the 33rd table. Yeah. But HTML is simpler than ever now, right? It's just divs. It's just divs. It's just the structure. CSS provides that style, and everyone knows what an expressive language that CSS is. It gives you exactly what you want. Exactly when you need it. You've all done this. It's a powerful language, as we've seen from what Rachel has to offer. It's truly an awesome and amazing language. And when and I tried to apply Rachel's design standards and improve that cup. And I appreciate the support. And then JavaScript is everything else, right? And JavaScript, with JavaScript, of course, it's a little bit different than Ruby and Clojure. Here is an animated GIF of me learning JavaScript. JavaScript is so great because you don't even need to learn the bad parts anymore. Now, there's this really amazing book that's called Secrets of a JavaScript Ninja, written by John Resig from jQuery, and I said to myself, that is a samurai. I said, hey, John Resig, why is there a samurai on the cover of Secrets of a JavaScript Ninja? And John Resig, who of course the inventor of jQuery, said to me, well, that's because JavaScript is loosely typed. It's got duck typing, so I apologize for that joke. I'm running out of time here, I'm sorry. So someone else very wisely said that JavaScript is the assembly language of the web. That was me. That, in fact, is a great quote, but everyone else says it because it's true. So I got argued with on the internet. People that said, from Reddit, they were like, oh, you're full of crap. It's not the assembly language of the web. So I went to the inventor of JavaScript, and I said, is that true? So I talked to Brendan Eich, and I said, that is Brendan Fraser. That is Brendan Eich. But Brendan Fraser's a beautiful man, so let's keep him up there. He said JavaScript is the x86 of the web, but he can't claim it's original. But it's happening. WebAssembly is happening. We're getting a bytecode right now, and this is an amazing thing. We don't want to let the layers handle too much complexity, though, because we're going to have JavaScript assembly at the bottom. We've got jQuery at the top. And sometimes I see you all doing some things with jQuery, and you think that you're slick, and you're like, hey, we're going to build this with jQuery. It's going to be awesome. You have to understand the layers there, because there's a lot going on here. And the argument that no one writes JavaScript anymore, they just write jQuery, it doesn't really follow. Do you know who said that, in fact? It was jQuery. jQuery said this to me on the internet, actually. This is jQuery. This is his IMDb page. He does some really great work. And once you know about jQuery, he's ruined it for you, because if your boss is like, should we maybe use jQuery for this project? You say, I don't know, is he available? I'll call his agent. Because you think you're going to use a certain JavaScript library, and you have this image in your mind about how amazing this project's going to be when you use this library, and then you build it, and it's like not really that cool, and you're like, I don't really know who to blame. But that's a problem, right? Consider using vanilla.js. Consider understanding what's going on. This is what I said to the individual at Intel. I said, you understand virtual machines, you know what the metal looks like. Think about the cloud, it stands on top. You know vanilla JavaScript on the client side. Consider libraries like jQuery and Angular and things that sit on top, but don't forget what's underneath. I encouraged him to think more about his web tools and expect more from them, because just as we heard in the previous keynotes, we're getting to a point now where things are kind of working well together. It's pretty sweet. We've got a cloud with elasticity. We've got our choice of languages. We've got a browser that is deceptively powerful. I've got a pocket supercomputer right here doing a lot of amazing stuff. So you can write JavaScript for that. So thank you very much. You are powerful and you know this cloud. You can program the browser, so get to work. Thanks.